Peace, sisters and brothers. My name is L.J. Hawkins. I'm a member of Socialist Alternative, New York City, born and raised in Harlem, New York. I'm here to talk about a little bit of the Black Lives Matter movement and the ideas of socialism. I think first we have to say that among African Americans, among young people, the ideas of socialism has a profound resonance with folks. And that's due to the fact of the historic legacy of slavery, historic legacy of Jim Crow in the United States, but also for many African Americans, we have always been against war, have always been in solidarity with the most oppressed throughout the world, have stood up and spoken out against injustice in every community under capitalism. And so when we think of the Black Lives Matter movement and the developments around the protests against law enforcement terror, the Colin Kaepernick protests that has spread throughout the sports world, we're seeing a whole new generation that are being born under the hellfire of capitalism and institutional racism. And how does socialism tie into this? It's a simple fact that in order for us to dismantle the very edifice of capital and racism, we must engage in the struggle against the system that's predicated on the daily exploitation of workers and youth, that in fact segregates workers along the lines of sexuality, of gender, of race, nationality. And in fact, the struggle for socialism is really about the unification of working people and the poor. Not a unification just based off the fact that we should just unify and sweep under the rug of the legacy of racism and how it has divide and conquer working people and the poor, particularly the historic question of white and black. But in fact, to see these questions of white privilege, to see these questions of the attack by capitalism on working people and the poor, and particularly people of color, we have to begin a process in order to really address the key issues facing working people as a whole, but also provide redress for people of color who have been historically denied their humanity, denied economic opportunity, and denied political advancement in the society. And so when we think of socialism, particularly in the United States, it has a rich history that dates back to the American Civil War. Some of the leading organizations of the 1800s, they were people who came from Europe, of Western Europe, who brought the traditions of the militant labor movement, of the social movements in Europe, brought those traditions here to the United States. And many of them were co-thinkers alongside Karl Marx and Frederick Engels. When we think of African Americans and socialism, it has a rich history that dates back to the Socialist Party in the United States. I'm thinking of the Socialist Party of Eugene Debs. People like Hubert H. Harrison, who was Afro-Caribbean, who arrived in the United States in the early 1900s. We think of the African Blood Brotherhood, once again Afro-Caribbeans, who combined the ideas of black nationalism and socialism. And then when the Russian Revolution took place in 1917, the African Blood Brotherhood joined the Third International, led by the co-leaders of the Russian Revolution, Lenin and Trotsky. I say this or highlight this information, this history, because there are deep roots to the ideas of socialism, of social struggle, of internationalism that runs deep in the African community, or even the African diaspora of the Caribbean, of Latin America, of Africa, and the United States, and Europe, and throughout the world. And so today our struggle to dismantle the edifice of racism and capitalism, we must engage in the struggle that once again reconnects the threads of internationalism, of seeing our struggle as part of an international struggle, along with the global oppress against the global oppressor. Also, linking the questions, the concrete demands facing working people and the poor, and particularly the type of issues and questions that are being posed to African Americans today, like that of the lack of adequate education, the lack of housing, of jobs, the lack of unionized wages and benefits. And so how do we engage in a struggle that unites African Americans, the white working class? And I think ultimately it's going to come down to the fact that we have to organize around the demands that matter to everybody. The key demands like the fight for 15, or for example, how to fight back and take control over the police of our communities. At the same time, we must also engage in a struggle that talks about independent politics, independent working class politics, away from the parties of big business, particularly that of the Democratic Party. They have shown themselves time and time again to be the mortician, the grave digger, and the graveyard of all social movements and of our struggles for freedom. And so this election cycle, once again, pits a demagogue like Trump with a status quo Democratic Party Republican, actually, if you really think about Hillary Clinton, and the New Democrats of the 1990s that ushered what we have today, some of the most regressive anti-working class laws and legislation passed during the Bill Clinton years from 1992 to 2000. Our struggle today must be intertwined with the struggle around the world. It must be interlocked with the struggle of working people here in this country to free itself from economic austerity, political disenfranchisement, and inadequate conditions that we face on a daily basis. I think that the ideas of socialism is getting a more broader hearing among working people and the poor because the conditions are only getting worse. In some ways, Bernie Sanders began that process, but in many ways, what we are seeing that is getting deeper. Ideologically, people are rejecting capitalism. They're rejecting neoliberalism. I think today, socialism, internationalism, solidarity, and social struggle is on the agenda. So I hope you join us, be part of our struggle, be part of this movement. Peace.